Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. I had no idea what I was getting into when my husband, Mike, invited me to his college reunion. He'd been talking about it for weeks, practically glowing with excitement. "You'll love meeting my old friends," he said. I smiled, knowing it meant a lot to him, but the whole thing felt like a formality. The kind of thing you do because it's expected, not because you want to. When we walked into the crowded venue, I felt out of place. I didn't recognize anyone, but Mike seemed to fit right in. His smile, the way he joked with people, it was like he'd never left. But there was something about his demeanor that made me uneasy. His eyes kept darting around the room, searching for someone he seemed eager to see. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The reunion was in full swing, people laughing and catching up over drinks, but I felt like an outsider. Mike's attention was mostly on a group of his college friends, but I couldn't help noticing how frequently he glanced over his shoulder. His face lit up as he spotted someone across the room. It was a man, tall, with dark hair, and wearing a smirk that seemed familiar. I couldn't place it at first, but the way Mike's eyes softened when he saw him sent a wave of unease through me. I smiled politely at some of the other guests, trying to engage in conversations, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Mike and this stranger. Who was he? And why did he make my husband so happy? There was something in that smile, something I didn't quite like. I told myself it was just jealousy, but deep down, I felt like I was missing something crucial. The man approached us with a broad grin. "Mike, I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice smooth, almost too casual. Mike's eyes lit up. They hugged, a long, lingering hug that made my skin crawl. I stood there, awkwardly holding my glass, trying to play it cool, but my stomach twisted. This wasn't just a friendly reunion hug. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to their relationship. The way Mike held him a second longer than necessary, the subtle, almost imperceptible touches, they were too intimate to be casual. "Babe, this is Chris, my old roommate." Mike finally introduced him to me, as if nothing was unusual. I smiled, but my heart wasn't in it. Chris shook my hand, his grip firm and confident, his eyes locking with mine for just a moment longer than was comfortable. "It's great to meet you," he said, but there was something in his tone that didn't sit right. After the initial introductions, Mike and Chris caught up, reminiscing about the old days. I tried to engage in the conversation, but every time I looked at them, I noticed the small details. Chris's hand resting on Mike's shoulder as they laughed. The way they shared inside jokes only they understood. I could feel the tension building in my chest, the feeling that I was intruding on something I wasn't supposed to know. Mike seemed completely at ease, but I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. I excused myself to the bar, needing a moment to breathe. As I walked away, I overheard their conversation, snippets of it floating through the air. "Remember that weekend at the cabin? I've never laughed so hard." Chris's voice was low, almost seductive. Mike responded with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, those were the days." But something in his tone was different this time. Hesitant, I made my way back to the group, trying to ignore the strange feeling creeping up my spine. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was just overthinking everything. But the way Chris and Mike interacted, it was like there was an unspoken connection between them. The longer I watched, the more it became clear. They were comfortable with each other in a way that didn't feel right. I watched them laugh, their eyes meeting in a way that seemed almost intimate. Mike caught my gaze and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone light, but there was something off about it. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just a little tired. It's been a long day." I wanted to ask him about Chris, about their past together, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? "Who was he to you?" seemed too blunt. So instead, I stayed silent, watching the dynamic between them unfold, feeling more like an outsider by the second. Later that evening, after dinner, Mike and Chris disappeared together for a while. I wasn't sure where they went, but I didn't feel like searching. I was tired, physically and emotionally. The weird tension between us had drained me. I sat at the table, chatting with some of the other guests, but my mind kept wandering back to Mike and Chris. What were they talking about? Where had they gone? I tried to shake the feeling of unease, but it lingered, gnawing at me. I couldn't focus on anything else. It wasn't until an hour later, when they reappeared, that I noticed the shift in the air. Mike seemed different. He was distant, distracted, and I could tell something had changed. His smile was forced, and his usual warmth had evaporated. The connection between us was fading, and all I could do was watch as he returned to the group, his attention fully on Chris. The rest of the evening felt like a blur. Mike and Chris kept exchanging looks, little glances that seemed to speak volumes. I tried to engage with the other guests, but it was like I was invisible, fading into the background of their world. Every time I caught Mike's eye, I saw a flicker of something I couldn't place. Guilt? Regret? Or was it just a reflection of the distance growing between us? The night stretched on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers. Mike had always been my best friend, my partner, but tonight, he felt like a stranger. I watched him laugh, joke, and exchange glances with Chris, and I wondered if I was the only one who saw the cracks in the facade. I had to know the truth. What was going on between them? What was he hiding from me? But I couldn't bring myself to ask. Instead, I just stood there, feeling smaller and smaller in the crowd. The night wore on, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being left behind. Mike and Chris were practically inseparable. Every time I looked up, they were in some quiet corner, talking, laughing, completely lost in their own world. At one point, I overheard them whispering, their words too soft to fully catch, but the tone was unmistakable. They were comfortable together, too comfortable. I forced myself to laugh at a joke someone had told me, but inside, I was a mess. The image of them standing so close, their eyes locked in that way, kept replaying in my mind. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I held it in. For now, I tried to tell myself I was being irrational, but deep down, something inside me knew. This wasn't just a friendship. It was something more. My heart pounded in my chest. I needed to know the truth. What was I missing? It was getting late, and the crowd began to thin out. I could see Mike and Chris still lingering by the bar, deep in conversation. It was impossible to ignore the connection between them. I felt like an intruder in my own marriage. The jealousy simmered beneath my skin, making my hands tremble. The whispers of suspicion that I'd pushed aside earlier in the evening were now undeniable. I couldn't let this go on. I had to know what was happening between them. My mind raced, trying to come up with a way to confront Mike. But every time I thought about it, my heart sank. What if I was wrong? What if I misunderstood everything? The fear of being wrong paralyzed me. But then again, I couldn't ignore the gut feeling that told me something was deeply wrong. I stood up, heading toward them, but before I could reach them, Mike turned and saw me. He gave me a small, apologetic smile, and for a moment, everything inside me froze. Mike walked over to me, his usual charm on full display, but there was a coldness behind his smile that I couldn't ignore. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but distant. I nodded, trying to smile, but the words caught in my throat. "Yeah, just a little tired." I forced myself to meet his gaze, but it was like he was looking right through me. He leaned in close, brushing his hand against my arm in a way that felt too rehearsed, like it wasn't real. "Let's head back to the hotel soon," he suggested. "Chris is staying with some of the others. It'll be good to get some rest." I nodded again, but inside, I was screaming. I wanted to say something, to ask him about the way he'd been acting, about his strange behavior with Chris. But all I could do was nod and smile, pretending everything was fine. As we left the reunion hall, I felt like I was walking beside a stranger. When we got back to the hotel, Mike seemed distracted, his mind elsewhere. I couldn't stand it. I knew something had changed between us, and the distance between us was growing. He showered quickly and then got into bed, pulling the covers over his head as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the night, the way Mike and Chris had looked at each other, the way they touched. There was something undeniably intimate about it. I tossed and turned, feeling like a caged animal, trapped in my own thoughts. After what felt like hours, I finally mustered the courage to sit up and look at Mike. His back was turned to me, but I could tell he wasn't sleeping either. My heart raced as I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What was I supposed to say? How could I even begin to ask about the growing suspicion in my chest? I couldn't find the words. The silence between us was unbearable. I could hear him breathing steadily, and for a moment, I thought he was asleep. But then, he shifted slightly, his back still turned toward me. I took a deep breath and finally spoke. Mike, what's going on? It was a simple question, but the weight of it hung in the air. He didn't answer immediately, and my heart thudded painfully in my chest. I waited, the seconds dragging on like hours. Finally, he shifted again, pulling the covers tighter around himself. What do you mean? His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he was trying to hide something. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. With Chris. Why is it so different when he's around? I braced myself for his response, but Mike didn't say anything. Instead, he turned to face me, his eyes dark and filled with something I couldn't place. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice flat. It wasn't convincing. I couldn't breathe. The silence stretched between us like a vast chasm, and I felt every inch of it. I wanted to scream, to ask him outright what was going on, but I was paralyzed. His words didn't make sense. There was no way he didn't know what I was talking about. The way he acted around Chris, the way they shared those looks, it was obvious. My fingers clenched the sheets beneath me as I tried to steady my breathing. Mike, don't lie to me, I whispered, my voice trembling. He stayed silent for a moment longer, his eyes avoiding mine. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping as if a weight was pressing down on him. You don't understand, he muttered, his voice barely audible. It's not what you think. My pulse quickened. This was it. This was the moment I'd been dreading. He was finally going to tell me the truth, or so I hoped. But instead, he turned away, pulling the covers tighter around himself. I'm tired. Let's talk tomorrow. I couldn't sleep. Not after what he said. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. What did he mean? It's not what you think. What was I supposed to think? I was torn between confronting him immediately and giving him space to explain himself. But how could I trust him after everything? The longer I lay there, the more my mind spiraled. The images of Mike and Chris together haunted me, their laughter, their touches, their whispered conversations. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. But what if I was wrong? What if I had misinterpreted everything? The doubt gnawed at me, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I had to confront him. Tomorrow. I couldn't wait any longer. The morning came too soon, and the tension between us was thick, suffocating. Mike was still asleep, his back turned toward me as if nothing had happened, but I could feel the weight of everything in the air. I got up quietly, not wanting to wake him, but the questions in my mind were too loud to ignore. I walked to the window, staring out at the busy city streets below. I could hear Mike stirring behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to face him. How could we go back to normal after everything I'd seen, everything I suspected? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I was losing myself in this. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. As much as I loved him, I needed answers, even if they were painful. I took a deep breath and turned around, walking back to the bed. Mike, we need to talk. The words came out with more conviction than I expected. Mike blinked, clearly startled by my tone. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of guilt, or was it just weariness? Either way, it only made the tension worse. He didn't speak right away, his eyes avoiding mine as he stretched. About what? He asked, his voice hoarse from sleep. But I could hear the underlying note of defensiveness. My heart beat faster as I struggled to keep my emotions in check. About Chris. About last night, I replied, my voice steady but shaking with suppressed fear. He froze. His face darkened, and for the first time, I saw something real in his eyes, fear. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. You're still thinking about that? He asked, his voice low, almost angry. You don't understand. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I kept it contained. No, I don't understand, I snapped. I don't understand why you're acting this way. I don't understand why you're so different around him. Why can't you just tell me the truth, Mike? Why are you lying to me? I took a step forward, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Mike sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world was on him. He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "It's not like that, okay?" he said, his voice strained. "You have to believe me. It's complicated." But his words felt hollow, like he was trying to cover something up, trying to shield me from the truth. I could feel the walls between us growing higher, and it terrified me. "Complicated," I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "You're telling me that what I saw last night, what I've been seeing for years, is complicated? How long, Mike? How long has this been going on?" I wasn't ready for his answer, but I needed to hear it. His face tightened, and for a moment, I thought he wasn't going to say anything. But then, his shoulders slumped, and he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Since college." The words hit me like a slap. My heart stopped in my chest. I could barely breathe as the weight of his confession settled over me. "What?" I managed to choke out. "What do you mean, since college?" Mike's eyes were distant now, like he was somewhere else, lost in the past. "I don't know how to explain it," he said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "Chris and I, we were more than friends back then. We were together." The world tilted beneath me. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. "Together?" I whispered, my voice barely a sound. "How? What do you mean?" Mike's gaze flickered with something that looked like guilt, and he finally looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since we'd arrived. "We were in love," he said softly. "In college, it was a lot more than just friendship. But then I left, and I married you, and I tried to bury it. I tried to forget about him." His words were like shards of glass, cutting into me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all I could do was stand there, trying to comprehend what he was saying. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally asked, my voice trembling with hurt. He swallowed hard, his eyes flicking away. "I couldn't. I didn't want to hurt you." The silence between us was deafening. My mind was racing, spinning, trying to make sense of everything. My husband, the man I'd built my life with, had been in love with someone else, someone who wasn't me, and he'd kept it a secret for all these years. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "So what now, Mike?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What am I supposed to do with this information? You've been lying to me. All these years, you've been lying." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked torn, like he was struggling to find the right thing to say. "I never meant to hurt you," he said finally, his voice cracking. "But I can't keep pretending it's not there. I can't keep pretending I don't still have feelings for him." His words were a knife to my heart. Everything I thought I knew about us was shattered in that moment. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I couldn't. Not now. I had to keep it together, at least for a little while longer. I turned away from him, pacing the small hotel room as the words continued to swirl in my head. "You've been sleeping with him, haven't you?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. I couldn't look at Mike as I said it, but I knew the answer before he even spoke. He didn't say anything at first, but the guilt on his face was all I needed to see. He'd been sleeping with Chris behind my back for years. "I never wanted it to happen like this," he said, his voice tight. "But it did, and I don't know how to fix it." His words were empty, meaningless. The damage had already been done. I stood frozen, my mind a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't even begin to process. The betrayal, Mike's admission, his cold honesty. It was too much. I turned away from him, trying to catch my breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. "You don't know how to fix it?" I repeated his words, as if they could make any sense. I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign to my ears. "You've been living a lie for years, Mike. You don't even know what it means to be honest with me." He stepped closer, his voice desperate now. "I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to be with you. But I couldn't let go of Chris. I never could." His words stung, but they also filled me with a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice, a pattern that had continued for years. I wanted to scream, to lash out at him, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. Nothing would ever be the same again. The room seemed to close in around me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every word he said cut deeper than the last, and with every confession, I felt like I was losing a part of myself. How long has it been going on? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mike hesitated, as if trying to decide how much to tell me. Since the reunion, he said finally, his voice barely audible. It was the first time we saw each other again, and it was like nothing had changed. He stepped closer, but I took a step back, shaking my head. So you've been sleeping with him this whole time? I couldn't even say the words without feeling my chest tighten, like the air was being sucked out of the room. Mike nodded, his face a mask of guilt and regret. Yes, I didn't want it to happen, but it did. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I was in. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, the weight of his confession crushing me. How could you do this to me, Mike? I whispered, my voice trembling. He looked at me with such sadness in his eyes, as if he truly felt sorry, but I didn't know if that was enough. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to end it, how to make it stop. I thought maybe we could just move past it, and it wouldn't affect us. But I was wrong. The room felt like it was spinning, and I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to steady myself. So now what? What do we do now? I couldn't even begin to wrap my mind around the possibilities. How could I move forward knowing what he'd done? Mike was pacing now, his hands running through his hair in frustration. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do, he muttered, his voice strained. I never meant for this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you, not like this. I couldn't look at him anymore. I couldn't bear to hear his apologies, his excuses. Nothing he said would change the truth that he had betrayed me, that he had been living a double life for so long. You've been lying to me for years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know who you are anymore. The words felt like a knife in my own chest, but they were true. Mike's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought he might break down. But he didn't. He just stood there, defeated. I walked away from him, pacing the room as my mind raced. I can't do this anymore, Mike, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. I don't even know who you are anymore. I don't know how I can forgive you for this. He didn't say anything, didn't move. He just stood there, his head bowed in shame. The weight of his silence suffocated me. You've been lying to me. You've been sleeping with him. All this time, you've been with him and not me. My voice cracked, and I felt the tears burning behind my eyes. I refused to cry, though, not in front of him. What am I supposed to do with all this, Mike? How am I supposed to look at you the same way again? I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. You've shattered everything. The pain was overwhelming. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I held them back. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I didn't want this to happen, Mike said softly, his voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you like this. I thought I could keep it all hidden, that I could live this life with you and still have him in the background. But I was wrong. I was stupid. I shook my head, unable to speak. The words felt like they were stuck in my throat, and no matter how much I tried, I couldn't seem to get them out. The truth was suffocating me, and I didn't know how to breathe anymore. I don't know how to fix this, Mike whispered, his voice full of regret. But I love you. I never stopped loving you. His confession hung in the air like a thick fog, clouding everything around us. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he loved me, that he didn't want to hurt me. But how could I, after everything that had happened? How could I ever trust him again? I took a deep breath and looked him in the eyes, forcing myself to stay calm. You love me? I asked, my voice quiet, but firm. You've been lying to me, betraying me, and you think that just saying I love you will make everything okay? My heart ached with the weight of his words, but there was no way I could forgive him. Not yet. Not when everything was still so raw. I don't know what to do with this, Mike. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you've done. Mike remained silent, his gaze locked onto mine, pleading for understanding. His face was a mask of regret, but it couldn't erase the truth of what he'd done. I don't expect you to forgive me right now, he said softly. I don't expect things to go back to normal, but I need you to know, I never stopped loving you. I'm just lost. I don't know how to make this right, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." His words hung in the air, but they felt hollow. How could I believe him after everything? His actions had shattered my trust in ways that words couldn't fix. I felt numb, as if I was no longer capable of feeling anything except the deep, aching void left by his betrayal. "You've destroyed us, Mike," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." The room felt impossibly small, the silence between us suffocating. Mike didn't move, didn't try to touch me, as if he knew that any gesture would only make things worse. I wanted to scream, to lash out at him for everything he'd taken from me, but I couldn't. My emotions were too tangled, too raw. All I could do was stand there, fighting back the tears that threatened to break through. "You don't get it, do you?" I finally said, my voice shaking. "You've betrayed me in ways I can't even explain. And now you want me to just forgive you? To act like none of this ever happened?" Mike's face twisted with pain, and for a moment, I thought he might collapse under the weight of his guilt. But then he stepped forward, his voice pleading. "Please, let me make it right. Please." His plea echoed in my mind, but the more I heard it, the more impossible it seemed. How could he make things right? How could anyone fix the mess he created? "How can you possibly make it right, Mike?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "You've been lying to me for years. You've been with him, and I've been left here, completely in the dark. How can you make up for all of that?" I was shaking now, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Mike looked like he was about to answer, but I couldn't let him speak. "No," I said, raising my hand to stop him. "There's nothing you can say. Nothing you can do. You've destroyed us." His eyes filled with unshed tears, and he reached for me, but I pulled away, stepping back. "Don't touch me," I whispered, feeling a mixture of anger and pain swell inside me. Mike's face crumpled at my rejection, but I couldn't bring myself to care. "Not now. Not after everything. Please," he begged again, his voice broken. "I love you. I don't want to lose you." His words felt like a cruel joke. How could he say that now, after everything he'd done? I shook my head, unable to respond. My heart was torn between the love I still felt for him and the realization that I could never trust him again. "Not after this. I don't know if I can keep doing this," I said, my voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can stay in this marriage, knowing what you've done." The words were like a knife to my own chest, but they had to be said. I had to confront the truth, even if it hurt. Mike stood there, frozen, as if he couldn't believe what I was saying. "You're leaving me?" he asked, his voice trembling. It was the first time I'd seen him truly vulnerable. The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks, and for a moment, I wavered. Maybe I wasn't ready to make such a drastic decision. But then I remembered the years of deceit, the lies, the way he had chosen Chris over me time and time again. I couldn't let him manipulate me anymore. "I don't know," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't know if I can keep living like this." The uncertainty in my voice was like a crack in the foundation of our marriage, but it was the truth. I couldn't stay in this relationship without feeling like I was constantly suffocating. Mike's face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Please, don't leave me. I can't lose you," he said, his voice breaking. It was the first time I'd seen him so desperate, and part of me almost felt sorry for him. But the other part, the part that had been betrayed and abandoned, was beyond caring. "You've already lost me, Mike," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you've done." The words tasted bitter, but they were true. His tears, his pleas, they didn't change what had happened. They didn't change the fact that he had been hiding something from me for years. And as much as I wanted to believe he was truly sorry, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just one more thing he could leave behind when it suited him. Mike stood motionless, his hands trembling at his sides. I could see the pain in his eyes, but I didn't know if it was enough. I didn't know if I could trust his remorse, or if it was just another lie to cover up the years of deceit. "I don't know what to say to make this right," he whispered, his voice filled with regret. But it didn't matter. I didn't want his words. I wanted actions. I wanted proof that he was capable of being the man I thought he was, but I had no evidence of that. "You can't fix this, Mike," I said, my voice flat. "Not anymore. The damage is done. You've broken us." And with that, I turned away from him, unable to look at him any longer. It was over. I left the room, my feet heavy, like they were dragging me through thick mud. The house that once felt like home now seemed foreign, filled with reminders of the life I thought we had. I needed air, space, to breathe without him suffocating me with his presence. I walked out onto the porch, gripping the railing as the cool night air hit my skin. I closed my eyes, hoping it would clear my head, but the images of Mike and Chris together flooded my mind. The thought of him with someone else, someone he'd obviously chosen over me, felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. How could I ever look at him the same way again? I felt tears stinging my eyes, but I wiped them away quickly, refusing to cry in front of him again. He didn't deserve my tears anymore. The night was still quiet, except for the sound of my racing heartbeat in my ears. I took a deep breath and forced myself to think, to reflect on everything that had happened. I could hear Mike's voice inside, begging me to stay, promising to do better. But how could I believe him? How could I trust that anything he said was true? His actions spoke louder than his words ever could. I thought of the years we'd spent together, our plans, our dreams, and now they felt like they had all been built on lies. The future I'd imagined for us had crumbled in an instant. I sat down on the porch, my hands shaking as I wrapped my arms around my knees. I felt so lost, so betrayed. It was getting late, and the cold was starting to seep into my bones, but I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. I couldn't face him, not yet. I didn't know what to do anymore. I didn't know if I could keep living this life with Mike, if I could ever look at him the same way again. I thought about leaving, about packing up and walking away from everything I knew. But the thought of leaving behind everything we had built together was just as painful as staying. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, and no matter how much I tried, I couldn't find a clear answer. It felt like I was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. I couldn't escape the truth, no matter how hard I tried. Mike's betrayal had shattered me in ways I didn't even know were possible. But more than that, it had broken something inside me that I didn't think could ever be fixed. I had trusted him, loved him, and now I wasn't sure if I even knew who he was anymore. How could I rebuild my life with him when everything we had was built on a lie? How did we get here? I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. How did we go from love to this? The questions echoed in my mind, and I couldn't find the answers. I had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I finally went back inside, my steps heavy, my heart even heavier. Mike was still standing where I'd left him, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tentative. I didn't answer at first. I couldn't bring myself to say the words he wanted to hear. I was far from okay. I was broken, torn between the love I still had for him and the overwhelming betrayal that threatened to consume me. I took a deep breath and finally spoke, my voice low but steady. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," I said. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mike." Mike's face crumpled at my words, and for a brief moment, I thought he might collapse. He reached for me, but I took a step back, shaking my head. "Don't," I whispered. "I can't do this anymore." He stopped in his tracks, the desperation in his eyes growing. "Please, don't say that. Don't leave me. I'll do anything, I swear. I'll make it right. Just give me a chance." But his words felt like empty promises now, like a broken record repeating the same lies. How could I believe him? How could I trust that anything he said was true? I shook my head again, this time with more force. "I need space, Mike. I need time to think. I need to figure out what's best for me." Mike's shoulders slumped, the fight leaving his body as he nodded slowly. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. "I'll give you space. But please, just know that I love you. I'll wait as long as it takes." His words were sincere, but they didn't change anything. I couldn't change the way I felt. I needed to heal, to process everything. I needed to figure out who I was without him, without the person I thought he was. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I don't know if I can ever be the same person I was before all of this. The silence that followed was suffocating. Neither of us knew what to say, and in that moment, it felt like everything had been said. The weight of the betrayal hung in the air, an invisible force that neither of us could escape. I turned away from him, unable to bear the sight of his pleading face any longer. I need to be alone, I said quietly. Mike didn't respond, but I could feel his eyes on me as I walked out of the room, my heart breaking with every step. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if there was a way to fix this. But one thing was certain. I couldn't keep living in this lie. I spent the rest of the night in a haze, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts I couldn't organize. I thought about leaving, about finding a way to start over without Mike, but I couldn't bring myself to make that decision. The thought of walking away from everything we had built together felt unbearable. But staying felt like a constant reminder of the betrayal, of the life I had lived under false pretenses. The truth was suffocating me, and I didn't know how to breathe anymore. I was lost, and I didn't know where to go. The days passed, but nothing seemed to change. Mike gave me space, as he promised, but it felt like we were both living in limbo. I went through the motions, eating, sleeping, but everything felt distant, like I was floating above my own life, detached from the reality I once knew. I avoided him as much as possible, hiding in the corners of our house, not sure of what to say or how to act. I couldn't even look at him without feeling that sharp pang of betrayal. His presence had once comforted me, but now it filled me with dread. The thought of facing him, of having to confront the truth again, was more than I could bear. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. So, I made a decision. I had to take control of my life again, even if that meant making the hardest choice I'd ever faced. I went for a long walk, my thoughts swirling around me like a storm. As I walked, I tried to clear my mind, but all I could think about was the life I had with Mike, the dreams we had shared, and how quickly everything had fallen apart. Could I really walk away from him? From everything we had built? Or was I doomed to stay in a marriage that was broken beyond repair? The air was crisp as I walked, and for the first time in days, I felt the tiniest sense of clarity. I had always been so wrapped up in Mike's world, in our life together, that I had forgotten who I was outside of it. I had lost myself in the process, and now I needed to find my way back. I needed to rediscover who I was without him. The thought of leaving him was terrifying, but the thought of staying in a marriage built on lies was even worse. I couldn't continue to live in the shadows of what he had done to me. I had to find my own light again, even if it meant walking away from him. When I returned home, Mike was waiting for me. His face was filled with anticipation, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hope. But I didn't know how to give him that hope. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him, if I could ever trust him again. I had come to a realization during my walk. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me. It was about my happiness, my peace of mind. And as much as I still cared for him, I knew that I couldn't continue to live in this broken marriage. Mike, I said, my voice steady but soft, I need to leave. I need to figure out who I am without you. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Mike didn't move. He just stared at me, his face stricken with disbelief. What do you mean, leave? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. You can't just leave. We can fix this. We can make it work. But I shook my head. No, Mike. It's not about fixing this. It's about me finding myself again. I've lost who I am in all of this, and I can't keep living like this. His face twisted with pain, and for the first time in days, I saw the rawness of his regret. But it wasn't enough. It couldn't erase what had happened. I could see the devastation in Mike's eyes, but it didn't change the fact that I had to do this. For myself. I had spent so many years putting his needs, his desires, ahead of my own, and now I had to put myself first. It wasn't easy, and my heart ached with every step I took away from him, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice breaking, but there was no other way. I can't stay in this marriage. Not like this. Not after everything that's happened. Mike's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost let myself be swayed. But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, and I knew this was the only choice left. Mike fell to his knees, his hands shaking as he reached for me. "Please," he begged, his voice hoarse. "Don't leave me. I love you. I can change. I'll do anything." His pleas were desperate, but they couldn't undo the years of lies, the years of betrayal. I had heard those same words too many times before. I had trusted him when he said he would change, when he promised things would be different. But the truth was, he never changed. He couldn't, because he didn't want to. "I don't believe you anymore," I said, my voice firm. "I don't believe in us." I walked out of the room, my heart heavy with sorrow, but at the same time, it felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep living a lie. The sound of Mike's sobs echoed in my ears as I made my way to the door, and for a moment, I almost turned back. But then I reminded myself why I was doing this. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. I had to be strong for myself, for my future. I spent the night at a hotel, alone with my thoughts. My mind kept replaying everything. Mike's betrayal, his lies, the way he had broken me in ways I couldn't even explain. I thought about the life I had built with him, the dreams I had held on to, and how quickly it had all come crashing down. But even as I thought about the pain, I knew it was the right choice. I couldn't go back. I couldn't unknow what I knew. I had to find a way to move forward, to reclaim my life and my happiness. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. I had no idea what to do next, but I knew I couldn't go back to the life I had left behind. I had to start over. I had to find my own path. The thought of facing the future without Mike by my side was terrifying, but it also felt strangely liberating. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew I had to walk away from the life that had held me captive for so long. I was ready for something new, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. It felt surreal, stepping away from everything I had known, as if I were walking through a dream that I couldn't wake up from. The weight of my decision, of leaving Mike behind, was heavy on my heart, but a part of me felt an odd sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's shadow. I wasn't a wife or a partner anymore. I was just me. But even though I had made the decision, I couldn't escape the ache of loss. Mike had been a part of me for so long, and now he was gone. It was impossible not to feel his absence in every part of my life. I spent the next few days and a days trying to navigate this new life I had carved out for myself. I rented a small apartment in the city, nothing fancy, but it was mine. It felt strange at first, waking up alone, eating meals by myself, but it also felt necessary. I needed to find peace again, and this space, this solitude, was a step in that direction. But despite the quiet, despite the newness of everything, I still couldn't shake the memories of Mike. He had been my world for so long that it felt impossible to completely erase him from my thoughts. I wondered if the ache would ever go away. I tried to distract myself, burying myself in work and anything that could keep my mind from wandering back to Mike. But no matter how much I tried to move forward, my thoughts always circled back to him, to the life we had shared. I found myself missing the little things, the way he used to laugh at my silly jokes, the way we'd spend evenings watching TV together. But then I reminded myself why I had left. Those memories had become poisoned, tainted by his betrayal. I had to let go of them, even if it felt like I was letting go of a part of myself. I couldn't keep holding on to a past that no longer existed. One evening, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, a knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it to find Mike standing there, looking worn and disheveled. His eyes were red, his face pale, and the sadness in his expression made my chest tighten. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, the old instincts telling me to slam the door, to run away from him. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside and let him in, my heart pounding in my ears. I knew this conversation would change everything, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. Mike sat down across from me, His hands clenched tightly in his lap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was suffocating, thick with all the words that had been left unsaid. Finally, Mike broke it. "I don't know what to say," he confessed, his voice shaky. "I know I hurt you. I betrayed you in ways I can never take back, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I've never been more sorry for anything in my life." His words hung in the air, but I didn't know how to respond. Could I ever forgive him? Could I ever trust him again? I looked at Mike, my heart torn between the love I once felt for him and the anger that still simmered inside me. His apology sounded sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough to heal the wounds he had caused. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said quietly, my voice cracking. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. What you did, it's something I can't forget." Mike nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness, but I just wanted you to know how much you mean to me. I don't know how to live without you." The pain in his voice made my chest tighten, but I couldn't let it sway me. The decision was mine to make. Mike stayed for hours, but we didn't talk much after that. I could feel the weight of our past between us, the years of shared memories now tainted by his actions. I didn't know what to do with it all. Part of me wanted to reach out to him, to forgive him, to go back to the life we had shared. But another part of me, the part that had been broken by him, screamed for me to keep moving forward. I couldn't go back. I couldn't let him back into my life. It wasn't just about him. It was about me reclaiming myself, about learning to live without him. As Mike left that evening, he looked back at me one last time, his face full of regret. "I'll always love you," he said softly, his voice filled with a sadness I could feel deep in my bones. I nodded, but I couldn't say anything in return. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and for the first time in weeks, I felt an eerie calm wash over me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was finally starting to heal. I was on my own now, and that was both terrifying and liberating. I had survived the storm, and now I had to learn how to live again. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I kept myself busy with work, with the small routines I had established in my new life. I still missed Mike, still thought about him often, but the pain had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. I knew it wouldn't be easy. He had been a part of me for so long, but I was learning to live without him. I was learning to be strong, to find my own voice again. I wasn't sure what the future would look like, but for the first time in a long while, I was excited to find out. It had been months since I last saw Mike. The apartment felt more like home now, though the ache of the past still lingered. I had rebuilt myself in ways I never thought possible. I spent time doing things I had once neglected, painting, reading, traveling, rediscovering parts of myself I had buried deep beneath years of compromise. I no longer felt lost, no longer felt like I was just a shadow of the woman I used to be. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I wondered about Mike. How was he? Had he changed? Did he regret what he had done? Or was he still the man I had once known? But those thoughts no longer held me captive. I had become my own person again. One day, I decided to go back to the college reunion that had started it all. I hadn't been sure if I was ready, but something told me I had to face that part of my life head-on, without the weight of Mike's betrayal hanging over me. I wasn't going to let his actions define me anymore. The moment I walked through the doors of the reunion, I felt a surge of confidence. The crowd was buzzing with familiar faces, some of them surprised to see me there. But I held my head high, determined to prove that I had moved on, that I was stronger than I had ever been. As I mingled with old friends, I realized how much I had changed. I was no longer the quiet, obedient wife I had once been. I was free, I was me, and I was proud of the woman I had become. And as I looked around the room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. I had gone through the worst pain imaginable, but it had led me to this point. I was finally in control of my own life again. I didn't need Mike, or anyone else, to define me. I had everything I needed within myself. Later that evening, I found myself standing by the punch bowl when a familiar face appeared in front of me. It was Mike. He looked different, older, more tired, but his eyes still held that same sadness. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice hesitant. I could feel the weight of his words, the unspoken history between us. I didn't expect to be here either, I replied, my voice steady. But I'm glad I came. We stood there for a long moment, both of us caught in the quiet between us, neither of us knowing exactly what to say. Finally, I spoke. I'm not the person I was when we were together, Mike, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to forgive you. But I'm okay. I'm really okay. Mike's face was a mixture of relief and sorrow. I know I can't fix what I've done, he said softly, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I always have been. There was a long silence between us, the ghosts of the past filling the space. I nodded, my heart heavy with all that had transpired between us. I appreciate that, Mike. I really do, I said, but I need you to understand that I've moved on. This chapter of my life is closed. And with those words, I finally felt the last of the chains that had bound me to him break away. We parted ways that night without any dramatic farewells. I didn't need closure from him anymore. I had already found it within myself. I didn't need him to apologize or ask for my forgiveness. I had forgiven myself long ago. As I walked away from the reunion, I felt lighter than I had in years. The pain, the betrayal, the heartache, everything had led me to this moment of freedom. I had learned how to stand on my own, how to trust myself again. And that was the greatest gift I could ever give myself. The months passed, and life continued to move forward. I started dating again, cautiously, unsure of what it meant to open myself up to someone new. But I wasn't in a hurry to rush into anything. I had spent so long trying to fix someone else, trying to make a broken relationship work. Now, I was focused on fixing myself, on building a life that was mine and mine alone. I learned that love wasn't about dependence or sacrifice. It was about mutual respect and trust. It was about finding someone who made you better, not someone who filled a void. A year later, I found myself standing at the edge of a new chapter in my life. I had built a career I was proud of, surrounded myself with friends who supported me, and found a sense of peace I never thought possible. I had learned to let go of the past, to forgive the man who had once been everything to me. And as I looked back on everything I had been through, I realized that the woman I had become was stronger, braver, and more resilient than I ever imagined. I was no longer defined by anyone else. I was finally free. It was then that I truly understood. The journey of healing was never about forgetting what had happened or erasing the pain. It was about learning to live with it, learning to move forward despite it. It was about finding strength in the face of adversity and using that strength to build a future that was worth living. I had survived the worst and emerged stronger than ever. I didn't need Mike. I didn't need anyone to validate me. I was enough, just as I was. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace.